Today we're going to be working on multiplying fractions. As we work through the PowerPoint, I want you to think about the question, how can we multiply a fraction by a fraction? I would encourage you to take notes as you work through the PowerPoint so that you can use those on lesson work. As always, I want to start out our lesson by looking at the lesson objective, what you're supposed to know by the time that you finish this lesson. So your learning objective for today is I am learning to multiply two fractions. Multiplying two fractions or a fraction and a whole number are skills you were taught in 5th grade. Actually, those are a 5th grade skill. In 6th grade, you need to know how to divide fractions, but multiplying fractions is so important to the division part of fractions. So I want you to think about what you learned as a 5th grader and apply it along with what you're going to be learning in this lesson to solve multiplication problems of fractions. So let's look at example 1. I want you to multiply a fraction and a whole number. So your problem is going to be 5 times 1/6. The strategy that I want you to use is change the whole number into a fraction and multiply. Now, I want you to think back what you learned in 5th grade, how to make a whole number a fraction. And see what you can come up with. I want you to pause the video, try it on your own first, and then we'll talk about an explanation in a few minutes. Pause the video now, please. Okay, so let's look at our explanation for example 1. We have 5 times 1/6. The first step that we should take is change the whole number into a fraction. So let's look at this whole number that I'm going to make into a fraction. I have a 5 there, and I want to make it stay a 5. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to place that 5 over 1. When I place it over 1, if I read that as a division problem, 5 divided by 1, I get 5. So the value of that 5 stayed the same by writing it as a fraction of 5 over 1. The next step is to multiply the numerator by the denominator, or multiply the numerator by the numerator and the denominator by the denominator. So we're going to multiply 5 times 1 and 1 times 6. So let's go ahead and do that. 5 times 1 is 5, and 6 times 1 is 6. So we have actually an answer to our problem, but we need to simplify that answer. If we're going to get the correct answer, they usually want it in simplest form. Sometimes they'll ask for it, sometimes they won't, but the correct answer is usually in simplest form unless they specify different. So let's think about 5/6. Is it in its simplest form? So when we think about fractions, we should always think about prime and composite numbers, not necessarily odd and even so much. So let's look at these two numbers here. We have a 5. Remember, prime numbers are only divisible by 1 in themselves. Composite numbers are divisible by more than one number. So let's think about the number 5. Is there any numbers that I can multiply to get 5 besides 1 in itself? Hope you said no there, because that means that it's a prime number. And there's nothing I can multiply times 5 to get to 6, so this problem is in its simplest form. So our final answer for this particular problem is 5/6. All right, let's move on to example 2. I hope that you took notes on example 1 because you're going to be able to use that to help you with this problem. The next problem that we're going to multiply is 2/6 times 2. Again, the strategy is to change that whole number into a fraction and then multiply. Pause the video and try it on your own first. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our explanation here. We have 2/6 times 2. The first step that we should take is to change the whole number to a fraction. So again, I want that 2 to stay 2, so I want its value to stay the same. I'm just going to place it over 1, so I have 2 over 1. The next step is to multiply the numerator by the numerator and then the denominator by the denominator. So when I multiply here, I have 2 times 2 is 4. Giving you the answer during the multiplication part of it. And then I'm going to multiply 6 times 1, and we all know that any number times 1 is itself, so my answer is going to be 6 here. Now let's take a few seconds to look at these problems. What do we notice about 4 and 6? What kind of numbers are they? Are they prime or are they composite? I hope you said those were composite, and they're also even numbers, so we know that they have a number that's in common with them. Can anybody tell me what that number is? Hopefully you're thinking of 2, because 2 goes into all even numbers. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to divide both of these by 2 to simplify our answer. So let me get my division sign here. And if I divide them both by 2, so it's going to be 4 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 gives us 2. And 6 divided by 2 gives us 3. So my simplified answer to this particular problem is 2/3. 2/3. So 2/3 is going to be our answer here. And it's in its simplest form. All right, sometimes when we multiply fractions with a whole number, our numerator can be larger than the denominator. What kind of fraction do we have when this happens? And I want you to think about whether or not we can leave our answers as a fraction in this type of form where the numerator is greater than the denominator. Now remember, you learned this in 5th grade, so think back to some of those 5th grade skills to see if you can come up with the answer for that. Okay, we're going to move on to example 3, and I'm going to go back and answer that question that we just had for you in this particular problem. So let's multiply this problem. We're multiplying 2/4 times 9. Your goal again is to change that whole number into a fraction and multiply. So pause your video and try it on your own. Okay, let's go ahead and move into our explanation here. The first step that you're going to take is to change that whole number into a fraction. So we're going to change that 9 into a fraction without changing its value. So we have 9/1. And then our next strategy is to multiply numerator by numerator and the denominator by the denominator. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply straight across. 2 times 9 is equal to 18. And then I'm going to multiply denominator to denominator. So 4 times 1 equals 4. So my fraction, if you're going to look at it now, a fraction now is 18/4. Now, we certainly cannot leave this fraction this way. First of all, this is an improper fraction, and we can't leave a improper fraction as our answer because it's not in simplest form. So we're going to have to do some type of operation to get rid of that. And remember that when we read these type of problems, we're reading it as a division problem. So it's 18 divided by 4. So what I'm going to do over to the side is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to divide 4 into 18 to see what kind of answer I get. So 4 goes into 18. And hopefully you know your basic multiplication facts. You're going to know that there's a factor times 4 that will get me really, really close to 18. And that's going to be 4. 4 times 4 equals 16. So now we're ready to subtract, and we know that 18 minus 16 equals 2. So our next goal is to write this answer as a mixed number. A mixed number. So what I want you to do is I want you to start at the top with our quotient. Our quotient becomes the whole number in our mixed number. The numerator becomes our remainder becomes the numerator in our mixed number, and then the denominator stays the same. So you're going to go clockwise around the division part there. So the answer to this problem is going to be 4 2/4. Now, is this in simplest form? Absolutely not. So that means we're going to have to do something else because we know that 2 and 4 are both even numbers and they're both divisible by 2. So let's think about what we know about fractions that have something like this in common. We know that if we're thinking about just basic multiplication facts, we know that 2 is half of 4. So we don't even really have to do division here, but we could if we needed to. We could divide by 2. But in reality, it's going to be equal to 4 1/2. Our answer is going to be 4 1/2. Takes me just a few seconds here to get this written with this pencil that's on here, so just be patient with me. So the answer here is 4 1/2. All right, so let's move on to example 4. This time we're going to multiply fraction by fraction. So that means we're going to multiply the numerator to the numerator in the second fraction with the second fraction, and then we're going to multiply the denominator in the first fraction to the denominator in the second fraction. Pause the video, try it on your own first. So go ahead and pause your video now, please. All right, so our strategy here is going to be to multiply the numerator by the numerator and then multiply the denominator by the denominator. So let's go ahead and do that here. We have 1 times 2 equals 2. Then we have 2 times 6, and if we know those basic facts, we know that 2 times 6 equals 12. So our answer for this particular problem is 2/12. Now, it's asking us to simplify our answer, so we've got to think about how we're going to simplify that. And we know that 2 is hopefully you're saying prime number, and it's only divisible by 1 in itself, but we need to find out if it has anything in common with 12. Can I multiply anything times 2 to get 12? And we all know that we can do that by multiplying times 6. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually divide both 2 and 12 by 2 to simplify it. So we're going to divide here. By 2. And 2 divided by 2 equals 1. So the numerator for our answer is going to be 1. And 2 divided into 12, or 12 divided by 2, equals 6. So our final answer for this particular problem is going to be 1/6. And anytime that we have 1 in the fraction, we know it's in simplest form if it's as the numerator. So if the 1 is the numerator, we know it's in simplest form. Not really sure why it just blacked out or read out our answer, but our answer is 1/6. And I'm going to go ahead and write that down here again for you to see it. 1/6. Okay, we're going to visit our learning objective again. We're going to have some more examples in an additional video that you're going to have to watch as well. So let's go ahead and look at this learning objective again. And then I'm going to have you to go watch the second video to get the remainder of the examples. So again, our learning objective is I'm learning to multiply two fractions.